execution-style murder on a quiet street in Greenacre. Mahmoud Ahmad had a bounty of $1 million on his head.
In the streets of Sydney's underworld, a name sends shivers down the spines of even the most hardened criminals: the Ahmed crime family. Known for their ruthless tactics and iron-fisted control, this notorious syndicate has left a trail of destruction in their wake. Extortion, drug trafficking, and cold-blooded murder are just a few of the crimes attributed to their reign of terror. But what happens when the underworld turns against its own? When the Ahmeds find themselves marked for death by their rivals, the stakes reach a chilling new height. As alliances crumble and loyalties are tested, the city holds its breath, waiting to see who will emerge victorious in this deadly game of cat and mouse. In the shadowy streets of Sydney's gangland, three brothers cast a long and ominous presence: Wally, Brownie, and Rock Ahmed. The eldest brother, Wally's name, was whispered in hushed tones amongst those who knew his dark dealings. He had a rap sheet longer than the arm of the law, with charges ranging from extortion to manslaughter. Wally's notoriety stemmed from his involvement in the fatal shooting of Mayez Dani, a well-known club owner of Sydney. A chilling event that sent shockwaves through the city's criminal fraternity, but we'll get into this later. If Wally was the older, more seasoned hand of the trio, then Brownie was the wild card, unpredictable and dangerous. He earned his nickname not for his sweet demeanor, but for his ruthless tactics. Brownie's criminal record was littered with violent offenses, including shootings and gun-related charges. His thirst for power and control made him a force to be reckoned with in the dark alleys where the underworld lurked. The youngest of the brothers, Rock, seemed to fly under the radar, at least as far as law enforcement was concerned. But don't let his low profile deceive you. Rock had his fingers in many unsavory pies. While his rap sheet might not have been as extensive as his brother's, his involvement in drug running and other illicit activities was well known amongst those who operated in the shadows. Their criminal activities were as varied as they were brazen. Extortion was their bread and butter, squeezing every last penny from those who dared to defy them. Drug running was another lucrative venture, with the Ahmed brothers overseeing the distribution of illegal substances across Sydney. And then there were the murders, cold, calculated, and carried out with ruthless efficiency. This brings us back to the murder of Mayez Dani. When Mayez Dani learned that his 18-year-old nephew's jaw had been broken in a fight with a doorman outside a nightclub in Oxford Street in June 2002, it triggered a fatal quarrel. Less than 48 hours later, Mr. Dani, 39, of Granville, lay dead outside a car wrecker's yard with 4 bullets in his chest. His alleged killer on June 11th was said to be the nightclub's employee and automobile wrecker's proprietor, Walid Wally Ahmad, 37, of Condell Park. It has been alleged that Wally assaulted Mr. Dani's nephew, Khaled Hamoud, outside the DCM nightclub in the early hours of June 9th, after refusing him entry. Following that, a fight broke out between Dani and Wally, which led to Dani being shot 4 to 5 times. The brothers had more than 55 cases open against them in the eyes of the law. Those who crossed the Ahmed family often paid the ultimate price. Their lives snuffed out in a hail of bullets and left to rot in shallow graves. Despite their love for violence, the Ahmed family preferred to keep a low profile. They operated in the shadows, conducting their business away from prying eyes and nosy law enforcement agencies. But even the most cautious criminal couldn't escape the watchful gaze of the police. The Ahmed brothers found themselves under constant scrutiny, with law enforcement agencies compiling dossier after dossier of their nefarious activities. The first sting operation took place on a balmy summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the city came alive with the buzz of nightlife. Acting on a tip-off from an informant, police raided a warehouse suspected of being a hub for the Ahmed brothers' drug trafficking activities. In a daring raid, officers seized large quantities of illicit substances, including coke, meth, and heroin, along with cash and weapons. Yet somehow they managed to evade capture, slipping through the cracks of the justice system time and time again. But as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. The Ahmed brothers' reign of terror would soon come crashing down around them. But for now, they continued to operate in the shadows, their presence casting a long and ominous shadow over Sydney's criminal underworld. In the heart of Sydney's gangland, tensions simmered beneath the surface, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. And explode they did on that fateful day when Monza el-Husseini made a brazen attempt on the Ahmed family's lives. But who is el-Husseini, you might ask? At 28 years old, he had already made a name for himself as a key player in an alleged interstate drug trafficking syndicate that spanned from Sydney to Melbourne. With ties to the notorious prisoner Bassam Hamzi, who was said to be the mastermind behind the operation, el-Husseini was no stranger to the world of crime. Charged with 15 offences connected to the syndicate, including supplying a commercial quantity of prohibited drugs and participating in a criminal group, he found himself thrust into the spotlight of law enforcement's scrutiny. Despite his attempts to evade capture, el-Husseini eventually turned himself into the authorities, accompanied by his solicitor. His surrender marked a significant development in the ongoing investigation, shedding light on the inner workings of the alleged drug ring. But for el-Husseini, the road ahead would be fraught with uncertainty. Denied bail and facing a litany of charges, he now found himself at the mercy of the justice system, his fate hanging in the balance as he awaited his day in court. However, he was released from jail much sooner than anyone had expected. Within 2 years, he was let go. When people came back from jail, you'd expect them to be ready to turn their life around, but that wasn't the case for el-Husseini. For those who knew him, el-Husseini was a complex figure, a man with one foot firmly planted in the criminal underworld, yet whose actions reverberated far beyond the confines of Sydney's streets. And once he was out of jail, he had set his sights on the Ahmed brothers after an associate in jail told him that they had an ongoing war with them and needed el-Husseini's help. Armed to the teeth and fortified with bulletproof vests, he descended upon a gathering at the Ahmed family home a couple of days after being released from jail, ready to unleash chaos and carnage. But fate had other plans. El-Husseini's grand scheme quickly unraveled as chaos erupted in the night. Shots rang out, filling the air with the acrid scent of gunpowder and the screams of terrified onlookers. But when the smoke cleared, it was el-Husseini who found himself on the receiving end of his own failed plan. In a twist of fate, he staggered into a nearby hospital, nursing wounds inflicted by an unseen assailant, and thus began a chain of retaliatory strikes that would echo throughout Sydney's gangland for years to come. The Ahmed family, outraged by the audacity of el-Husseini's attack, wasted no time in seeking vengeance. Retaliation came swift and merciless. As bullets flew and bodies fell, drive-by shootings became a common occurrence, with rival factions locked in a deadly game of cat and mouse. But amidst the bloodshed and chaos, one thing was abundantly clear. Violence was endemic in Sydney's gangland. It was a world where disputes were settled with bullets and vendettas spanned generations. And for the Ahmed family, the el-Husseini incident was just the beginning of a long and bloody war. As the body count rose and the streets ran red with blood, it became apparent that peace was but a fleeting illusion in the unforgiving world of Sydney's gangland. Following this, on September 11, 2005, Brownie was charged with shooting Monza el-Husseini in the hand and shoulder. Police found a crashed car at Condole Park after the home of el-Husseini's aunt was sprayed with 32 bullets, yet the police could not charge Brownie. Well, let's just say that it was a grave mistake, because Ahmed brothers were not going to back down. Another shooting happened in Condole Park. It was here that Safwan Chahi and Wali Ahmed crossed paths, igniting a feud that would have far-reaching consequences for both the Ahmed family and the broader criminal landscape of Sydney. Safwan Chahi, a figure with ties to the criminal underworld, found himself at odds with Wali Ahmed, the patriarch of the infamous Ahmed crime family. Their dispute centered around a matter of debts and loyalty, two commodities that held considerable weight in the unforgiving world of organized crime. As tensions simmered between the two factions, a meeting was arranged at Wali's car wrecking yard, nestled in the industrial expanse of Condole Park. What transpired next would be etched into Sydney's criminal history. In a flurry of violence and gunfire, Safwan Chahi met his untimely demise at the hands of those loyal to Wali Ahmed. Bullets pierced the night air, tearing through flesh and bone as the feud between the two families reached its boiling point. However, the cost of this feud turned out to be huge for the Ahmed family. In the bustling corridors of Bankstown Central Shopping Centre, amidst the hustle and bustle of shoppers and vendors, a sinister plot unfolded that would seal the fate of one of Sydney's most notorious crime lords, Wally Ahmed. It was a seemingly ordinary day in April 2016 when Wally, perhaps seeking solace or simply going about his business, found himself seated outside a cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the scent of impending danger. Little did he know that lurking in the shadows was a masked figure, armed with malice and a deadly intent. With a swift and calculated precision, the gunman closed in on Wally, his footsteps masked by the cacophony of the crowded mall. And then, in an instant, the tranquility of the afternoon was shattered by the deafening roar of gunfire. 7 shots rang out, each one finding its mark with deadly accuracy, tearing through Wally's chest and shattering his body. The shoppers scattered, their screams echoing off the walls as chaos descended upon Bankstown Central. But the assassin was swift in his retreat, disappearing into the throngs of panicked bystanders before anyone could identify him. As the dust settled and the wails of sirens filled the air, Wally Ahmed took his last breath, a victim of the very violence he had so often wielded as a weapon. And guess what? When the police looked into the case, many twisted things turned up. For starters, a review of hours of CCTV from in and around the shopping centre led police to believe the murder may have been planned for a day earlier. Video footage captured a luxury vehicle driving into the car park, close to Ahmed, who had just finished a gym session. At the time, Wally was spotted near the neighbouring Havana Cafe, and uniformed police officers walked past him. Investigators believed those officers and the presence of a marked police car in the car park spooked Wally's would-be attackers. CCTV captured the car speeding away from the shopping centre without a shot being fired. Then, 24 hours later, a sole gunman ran up to Wally as he sat at the same cafe and fired several shots, eliminating the 40-year-old gang leader. To try and throw police off their track, it is understood the gunman and accomplices swapped getaway vehicles up to 3 times. They abandoned the initial getaway car, a white Mercedes, which was found torched in Greenacre, before getting into a second vehicle. It is believed they then planned to get into a third car, with another driver behind the wheel, and torch the second vehicle. But it didn't just end there. The revenge went on. A suspect in the shooting, crime figure Hamad Assad, was shot dead in the driveway of his George's Hall home 6 months later. Anyone would have thought this would be the end, but the killings still continued. 5 months after that, a suspect in Assad's shooting, Hells Angels figure and Ahmad family associate Kemal Blackie Barakat, was murdered in his Mortlake unit. Many believe Ahmed A.J. Jabir was behind it, but couldn't trace which gang he was associated to. Following the demise of 2 key suspects in these underworld slayings, police started the investigations, which come under Strike Force Osprey. While each murder is being investigated individually, the relevant information is shared across the teams. Homicide Squad Commander Detective Jason Dickinson said. However, eventually, the case turned cold. Yet even as Wally's life ebbed away, his legacy lived on, casting a long and ominous shadow over Sydney's criminal underworld. For his brother, Brownie Ahmed, the news of Wally's demise was a disaster, prompting a desperate bid for survival. With law enforcement closing in and the spectre of justice looming large, Brownie made a bold decision to flee the country and seek refuge in the distant lands of Lebanon. It was a daring escape, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but for Brownie, it was the only option left. For months, he remained in hiding, a fugitive from justice, haunted by the memories of his past and the spectre of his brother's death. But even as he sought sanctuary in the far-flung corners of the globe, primarily Lebanon, the long arm of the law reached out, its grasp unyielding and unforgiving. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison, but was released within a year and a half on early parole. After Wally and Brownie faced the consequences of their life decision, it was Rock Ahmed's turn. He found himself thrust into a position of unexpected responsibility. With Wally's $7.7 million in debts looming large and the family's criminal empire in disarray, Rock made a fateful decision to assume his brother's burdens and expand their illicit operations into new and dangerous territories. With a heavy heart and steely resolve, Rock embarked on a perilous journey into the murky world of drug importation. It was a path fraught with peril, but for Rock, it was a necessary gamble to keep the Ahmed family afloat in the treacherous waters of Sydney's criminal underworld. But unbeknownst to Rocky, law enforcement agencies had been meticulously gathering evidence against him, biding their time and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Under the guise of a covert undercover operation, police officers infiltrated Rock's inner circle, gathering intelligence and building a case against him. As Rock's ambitions grew, so too did the net of surveillance cast around him, tightening with each passing day. And when the time was right, law enforcement pounced, arresting Rock and his accomplices in a coordinated raid that sent shockwaves through the criminal fraternity. The evidence against Rock was damning, of a trail of paper and digital breadcrumbs leading straight to his doorstep. From intercepted communications to clandestine meetings, the prosecution built a compelling case that left little doubt of Rock's guilt. In the cold confines of the courtroom, he faced the full weight of justice, his fate hanging in the balance as the prosecution laid bare his crimes for all to see. And when the gavel finally fell, it was a sobering moment of reckoning. Rock Ahmed was sentenced to 15 years in prison with a non-parole period of 8 years and 9 months. For him, it was the end of an era, a swift and decisive downfall that spelled the end of his reign in Sydney's criminal underworld. But for law enforcement, it was a triumph of justice, a victory won through patience, perseverance, and unwavering determination. But the Ahmed family story didn't end there. While his brother Rock was behind the cold grey walls of the prison where most would see confinement, Brownie Ahmed saw an opportunity. This is when Brownie was released from jail. He resurfaced and continued to yield power and influence, orchestrating a reign of terror that extended far beyond the prison bars. With a calculating mind and a ruthless determination, he utilized intimidation tactics and extortion to maintain his grip on the criminal underworld. Through a network of associates both inside and outside of prison, Brownie orchestrated a myriad of criminal activities, from drug trafficking to extortion schemes, for over $10 million. No one was safe from his reach, as he used his connections and influence to manipulate those around him. But it was not just his criminal enterprises that struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. Brownie's penchant for violence knew no bounds, as he conducted attacks on rival gangs and even fellow inmates with chilling precision. Through a combination of bribery, coercion, and sheer force of will, he continued to operate with impunity, his presence casting a long shadow over the criminal landscape of Sydney. After being released from prison, he had not changed one bit. In the quiet suburb of Greenacre, amidst the mundane rhythms of everyday life, a dark and sinister plot was set into motion, a plot that would culminate in the brazen execution of one of Sydney's most notorious criminals, Brownie Ahmed. It was a meticulously planned hit, orchestrated with chilling precision by those who sought to exact revenge upon Brownie for his long list of sins. As he stepped out of a friend's house on that fateful day, little did Brownie know that he had walked into a carefully laid trap, his fate sealed by the hands of his enemies. With the stealth of a predator stalking its prey, the gunman emerged from the shadows, his weapon poised and ready. And then, in an instant, the calm of the suburban street was shattered by the deafening roar of gunfire. Bullets tore through the air, finding their mark with deadly accuracy, as Brownie's survival was on the line. But the assassin showed no mercy, unleashing a barrage of bullets that left Brownie lying lifeless on the pavement, his blood staining the concrete beneath him. As the dust settled on the bloody demise of the Ahmed family, Sydney's criminal underworld trembled on the precipice of chaos. The death of Brownie Ahmed had ignited a powder keg of violence and retribution. In the weeks and months that followed, a wave of shootings and murders swept through the city, each one linked to the power vacuum left by the Ahmed family's demise. Rival factions clashed in a desperate bid for dominance, leaving no corner of Sydney untouched by the tide of bloodshed. This was the story of the Ahmed brothers, who once ruled the streets of Sydney with fear and became victims of the same violence that they once helped create. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to check out our channel. We've got many stories from the underworld to share with you. See you in the next one.